I whacked my knee real good, so excuse me, I'm going to have to sit down a couple of days ago. But I grew up on a ranch milking Guernsey cows. And I would get up at 4:30 every morning to do my duty. And lo and behold, having a nice bit of jet lag coming here, I woke up at 4:30 this morning. So I'm right in the groove of where I was. So this is a little bit of a homecoming for me. But while I was doing my work in indigenous and tribal cultures, I would often come across these individuals that would go into trance-like states to act as healers or seers for their community. And these are the people that we call shaman. And they're in every culture that I've been in. And I was surprised to learn that so many of them were identified for having their shamanic gifts by having what we would call a psychotic break. They are either hearing voices, having visions. It was often accompanied by some sort of mental, emotional turmoil, and they were typically taken aside by an older shaman and told that this was a calling. And it was a calling for them to begin to develop their very unique and their very powerful sensitivities. And then they would be given, usually the shaman, as a mentor to take them through this very difficult initiation. And all this was very exciting to me and fascinating, but I was doing mainly human rights work until 4 years ago, I met a young man in my hometown of Seattle named Adam that I'd like to introduce you to here.
I was always just very excited. I was just the happy kid. I was 20. It was 4 days after my 20th birthday. I went nuts. So when it first occurred, it was very fun and exciting. It was the first time I had ever experienced a real connection to the universe, where I really felt like a part of this, that I was this was me. It was just like incredible. Then I kept going, and then I went way too far, and then it got scary.
And it was terrifying. You know, it was awful, actually.
It was just kind of like a panic, I don't know, put some medication in this kid and just hope for the best. There was a point where I was taking 15 pills in a day. And just, like, I felt like a lab rat. And the side effects were just awful, absolutely awful.
And we went from one doctor to another doctor and one prescription to another prescription.
We couldn't do anything. We couldn't help him.
So after 4 years of severe side effects, Adam went cold turkey on all his meds, which is not to be recommended. And he did a 10-day silent meditation retreat, meditating 10 hours a day. And that stabilized him. And he was able to go back to work after not working for 5 years. And so when I met him, he was working at Whole Foods grocery store, which is a very high-end grocery store in America. He was living in this beautiful little cabin on a lake, and he had this kind of just normal life. And I thought, what a great story this is in terms of somebody recovering by the use of meditation. And so I contacted a friend, and we started filming him. And it was about 2 or 3 months into our filming where he went to do another meditation retreat. And he had all these issues of childhood start coming up. And it was bothering him, and he went to the leader of the retreat, and he told him about what was going on, and he revealed his past mental health history, and they told him that he would have to leave. They just couldn't take the liability for that. So he was isolated from that. And about 2 weeks after that, he became estranged from his family when he had the realization, and he confronted a relative who he had come to believe had molested him as a child. So all of a sudden, he was cut off from 2 of his main resources, his support, and isolated. And at that point, we just watched Adam just spiral down. It was really dramatic what happened to him. Within a couple of weeks, he had lost his job at Whole Foods. He became homeless. He was living in this abandoned car. He got severely beat up on the street. And we were just watching this whole thing unfold and really not knowing what to do. So we just started interviewing psychologists, psychiatrists, mental health workers to see if there's anything we could do to help him. And that's when I really started to get my education about the mental health crisis in my country of the USA. And first of all, Adam is not alone. 30 to 50% of the homeless have a mental disorder. 56% of our prison population, which was shocking to me, has mental disorder. They are indeed our new asylums. And in terms of the number of people going on disability insurance for mental issues, that number has quadrupled in a 20-year period. So I was just saying, I was asking, what is causing all this? And I began to learn the landscape of the mental health field. The main paradigm right now that drives our treatment and our research is that mental illness resides in the brain, and it's a broken brain. It's a chemical imbalance. And I assumed that was fact, scientific fact. But indeed, it has never been proven. There's never been found a biological marker that can tell whether you're schizophrenic or bipolar or a schizoaffective disorder. And so this whole thing is a theory. And so our research is driven by hunting for another pharmaceutical that has less side effects, the neural pathway, that cluster of genes that will hopefully one day be able to turn on or off. And not only is our research driven by this, but of course our treatment is. So our main treatment modality is pharmaceuticals. And if you look what's happened in the last 20 years, or in a 20-year period, you look at this figure, it's increased 80-fold in a 20-year period. And so my question was, with this huge investment in our main treatment modality, why are those disability numbers going up? Why are all these people going into our prisons? And so one of the things, and one of the partial answers is we're diagnosing better. And if you look at that catalog of diagnosis that's published by the American Psychiatric Association called the DSM, it was first published in 1952 and it came out with 106 disorders. Well, DSM-5 just came out months ago and it showed up with 365 disorders. And some of those disorders were like sibling rivalry disorder. If you lost your spouse after 40 years, 50 years of marriage and you're in grieving, if that goes on longer than 2 or 3 weeks, that's severe depression. So we're seeing that we're starting to pathologize normal human experience. And mostly it's coming out of Europe. The psychiatrists that are screaming at our system that we've exported to the rest of the world. So we just went out and we interviewed a bunch of people who had been diagnosed just to ask them, what was your diagnosis?
Schizophrenia, schizotypal, schizoid personality, schizoaffective, bipolar 1 and bipolar 2, major depression.
Homicidal ideation, bipolar, ADHD, ODD, depression and anxiety.
Manic depression, bipolar 1, and just one time schizoaffective.
In the era of the DSM-3, there were like 12 personality disorders, and I had 8 of them, and the perfectionist in me wanted to try and get all 12.
So Adam had like 6 diagnoses. And so these labels that carry all this stigma just aren't that precise. And so we started posting all these interviews, and we continued to do these interviews. We've done about 70 or 80 now with neuroscientists, psychologists, academics, anthropologists, and posting them on our blog. And we began hearing from these individuals that referred to themselves as survivors. And these are people who have managed to navigate a mental health crisis successfully. And they call themselves survivors of the mental health system. And they told us of this growing movement, and they were part of it. And they called it the survivor movement, of people that have really found themselves on the internet. And they're forming these groups of support. They find themselves, they come out of the shadows of their diagnosis and their labels, and they share their experiences, and they form these support groups. And this is something that's growing very rapidly. It's grassroots, it's worldwide, something I knew nothing about. And it's sometimes called the recovery movement. And so we just took and interviewed a couple of these people, and we've started doing surveys with them. And I just want to introduce you to a couple of these individuals because they have a very unique perspective.
And I was hearing very, very aggressive voices, and I ended up walking to the Golden Gate Bridge, and I remember dragging my arm against the chain link fence, and my fingers were bloody. And when I got to the bridge and I looked down into the fog of the bay, I really felt like I needed to end my life. I felt like I was this complete failure. What I would like to see is that everyone who goes through the kind of crisis that I went through is given an opportunity to explore what it might mean, to hear the stories of people who've gone through something that's similar, to meet other people who hear voices, to meet other people who see messages and see synchronicities, to present them with the possibility that maybe it's not just a broken brain, maybe it's not just an illness, maybe this is not just something to hide and be ashamed of, maybe it's something to explore and learn from.
I was diagnosed as a 14-year-old, and I was put on psychiatric drugs at that time and took them until the age of 27. Once I came to see myself as having this disease living inside of me, I stopped trusting in my intuition because it was sick. And what I did come to realize was, wait a minute, my suffering is incredibly meaningful. It's here for a reason, and I have to stop running away from it. And I realized, yeah, I have the only way to find myself again and to get back to an authentic sense of self is to feel all of this and to listen to it and to explore it and to not be afraid of it. So that's what I started to do.
So we started doing these more or less informal surveys of these survivors and just asked them, what was the most important thing in your recovery? What helped you the most? And number one, what we heard over and over again, is you've got to believe you're going to recover. So many of them were told that you've got this brain disease. We don't have a cure for it. We can manage it over your lifetime with these medications. But there was no recovery. And so you can imagine if you're a 20-year-old kid, which this happens a lot like Adam, and you're in this state of confusion and fear, and you don't know what's happening to yourself. You're all of a sudden you've left consensus reality, and an expert comes and tells you your brain is broken and it can't be repaired. You can imagine how that could be self-fulfilling. And the thing with shamanism that was so impressive to me, they get a whole different message. You know, this is a growth process. This is something that you can learn from. You can learn to handle these sensitivities you have, and we're going to help you do that. We have somebody here that's been through that, and they're going to help you. So this is, it's framed in a much more hopeful and meaningful way. And hope and meaning is so much to do with recovery. The other thing that they said over and over again is get support. And if that support person does not believe you can recover, get another support person. And one of the things that they really count on is what they call peer-to-peer support. And that's taking somebody that's been through it, somebody that's in the middle of a crisis, pair them with somebody that's already gone through one. And that is something that's extremely important. we saw what happened to Adam when he lost his support. It was dramatic, his downward spiral. I just couldn't believe how fast that happened. In the case of the shaman again, they get support. They get this older person who's already been through it, and that can coach them and guide them through that very difficult navigation of this mental state. The other thing was find meaning. Both Laura and Will talked about the importance of meaning. We all need meaning to keep ourselves going. And what is the meaning in what we're going through here when one of these things happen? That's the thing with the biomedical explanation of a broken brain that is so damaging. It's just a random act that just falls through. There's no meaning to it. There's nothing that you can learn from it. And so, in that respect, it isn't very helpful. The World Health Organization did a study that was very interesting. Back in 1969, they took 9 countries around the world, mainly in Europe, US, but 3 of them were these developing countries. And they found that the recovery rate from these severe states like schizophrenia and bipolar were much better in the developing world than they were in the developed world. And the psychiatric community couldn't believe it, so they had that study repeated in 1978, then again in 1977, over and over again, that same result came out. And, so they said, being in a developed country is a strong predictor of not attaining complete remission. So as I've gone into these cultures, one of the things, obviously, the framing, they aren't afraid of anomalous experiences. They're not afraid of non-ordinary states. They don't go into this state of fear. So when Adam went into that state of fear, all of a sudden his parents are in that fear bubble. And it's just, all that just amplifies and is recorded in the individual. The other thing I've noticed is I've traveled around. This is Urpi. She's 13 years old. She's in a tribe in Irian Jaya, known as the Dani tribe. And she lives in this little hut along with her grandmother, who was dying at the time, and she was mourning her great-grandmother. But her grandparents, her parents, 6 brothers and sisters, a kid that was adopted, and all 13 of them live in this one little hut. And I spent 3 days near them while this grandmother was dying. And people were coming for that 3-day period out of the hills. And these houses are spread like almost a quarter of a mile apart. And some people had walked 2 days to come and say goodbye to this woman that they had known their whole life. And I thought, what a wonderful way to go through that transition with everybody you've known over your lifetime coming, and they were holding her, stroking her hair, and telling her how much they loved her. And it was just such a contrast with the way so many of our older people die alone in these old age homes. So these people are very connected to each other. The other thing is, this is Malik and Yasmina, and they spend all their time together. And I have often asked, why isn't Yasmina, who's 5 years old, spending more time with her parents? And they say, well, she has a lot more in common with Malik, because Malik is about to go back into the spirit world. Yasmina has just come out of the spirit world, so they have the most in common. And so they have this connection to the spirit world. I mean, there's spirits in the rivers, in the mountains, and they talk to these spirits. They talk to their ancestor spirits. So they have this interconnectedness that we've lost in our hyper-individualized societies, our modern societies. And that connection is what really is, to me, is the basis of mental health. And do you remember what Adam said at the beginning of his break? He said it was the first time I felt connected to the universe. I felt this oneness. Well, we've been told by many of the psychologists and psychiatrists we've interviewed that glimpse of that unity is very common amongst the quote-unquote mentally ill. And it's just made me think, if we could just take the time to listen to these people that are going through these states and listen with an ear to understand people like Adam that end up in the prisons and on our streets, that could be the medicine that we're looking for, And I just want to finish by saying a couple of things. Number one, of all these interviews we've done, no one has said medications should not be used. Everybody said there is a time for the use of these meds in crisis situations, but when they're used conservatively and in conjunction with good social and community support. The other thing they said is everybody said they're being way, way, way overprescribed, especially to our kids. And the other thing I want to leave you with is I don't want to leave you with an over-romanticized view of indigenous cultures, because I've been in these cultures long enough. They're human. They have their mental health issues, and not everybody becomes a shaman, but that has an issue. But they sure have a lot to teach us about community, social support, the importance of the way we frame something when somebody's in the middle of one of these crises. And for that, I owe them a great debt of gratitude. And I felt so privileged to be with these people that live close to land, these connected lives and interconnected ways of seeing the world. So thank you very much for letting me come here and spend the afternoon or the morning with you. And thank you.